Danny Rowling, one of the most notorious serial killers in U.S. history. His rapid descent in just 1 month led to the murder of 5 innocent people in 1990. Psychological criminologist and former FBI agent Dr. Brianna Fox investigates why Danny Rowling defied authority and societal norms to blatantly commit his brutal and sadistic murders. Now a professor at the University of South Florida, she conducts research in areas of psychological criminology and offender risk assessment.
There are red flags in the behavior of all serial killers. Behaviors that would raise concern individually, but when viewed together, show a clear escalation in behavior and descent into murder.
Were there early signs that he would descend into a spree of killings? And could police have caught the man who would become known as the Gainesville Ripper earlier?
I'm Dr. Brianna Fox, and this is Descent of a Serial Killer.
Dr. Fox will be using her expertise and research to examine the case of Danny Rowling, also known as the Gainesville Ripper, and will be identifying the red flags law enforcement should look out for in the descent of a serial killer.
Danny Rowling's case is a fascinating one. Everything about it is textbook serial killer. Rowling's experiences throughout life have made him rage against the world, and when he explodes, the results are predictably horrifying. To really understand Danny Rowling's descent into the Gainesville Ripper, we need to learn more about his childhood, his early influences, what made him. I, along with my fellow experts, will be looking to identify red flags which could have indicated this to us at an early stage. Danny Rowling was born in Shreveport, Louisiana in 1954 to Claudia and James Rowling, who always maintained he did not want to be a father.
Shreveport, Louisiana is, it's the South. It's the bayou. It's a different lifestyle. My experience with that place, and I've been, is that it feels like it's still 1975 there. People move at a slower pace. People tend to be friendlier. It's very community-oriented.
Well, Danny grew up in a hostile environment. The family environment was very hostile. His dad wasn't really what you would call a loving father by any means.
He had such a dreadful life himself as a child. He saw his own grandfather slice his grandmother's neck open.
James Rowling was a veteran of the Korean War, decorated there, all sorts of medals. He was also served over 20 years on the Shreveport Police Department. So he had a side of him that was very heroic, but he also had a very dark side.
He served as a police officer and did okay with that, but at home, he was an absolute tyrant.
Danny had described how people really looked up to his father for the things he had done, but when his father would get home and take his uniform off, he would change into a completely different person.
My dad was a policeman, all right? And he was highly respected as a policeman. But when my dad came home, he was a different person. He did things to my mother and my brother and me when we were so young. There were things that happened in my childhood when I was very young that formed and fashioned the way my mind works. As soon as he opened the door and he let you spend a little time with him, he'd slam the door in your face, and then there would be that cold granite figure of my father that I hated.
And James Rowling didn't want children. He beat his wife when she was pregnant. He didn't want his wife to love her child. He didn't want his child, Danny Rowling, to be held in his mother's arms. He was jealous of that. So he mistreated his wife and Danny all through their lives because he simply did not want children.
So when Danny did not well in school, he got a beating. When Danny said the wrong thing, he got a beating. When Danny looked at his dad the wrong way, he got a beating. So he grew up just being abused.
He called him worthless. He said he was a mistake. He said he was an accident. I mean, these type of things can only, do damage to a person, and cumulatively, you wonder what it can do to somebody's psyche.
He compared it to feeling like a volcano could erupt at any time with his father because of his father's mood swings. And so it really damaged Danny's self-esteem growing up. He definitely had strong hostile feelings toward his father, and yet it was this ambivalent sort of feeling as well, because like any boy, he still loved his father and still craved his father's approval.
So his father was abusive, and his mother, unfortunately, struggled with mental health issues.
Dad beat up the mom, and there's Danny with a front row seat.
In Danny Rowling's case, his mother wanted to care for him, but his father, James Rowling, told the mother he did not want her to love the son. He did not like her son being in her arms. He did not like her giving attention to her son. So he didn't get the proper love from his mother. And this is called attachment disorder. What a child should get from a mother, feeling love and closeness and safety, he did not get. Now, when a child has attachment disorder, they can grow up very angry. In other words, I'm not cared for, I'm not loved, and I can't trust anyone.
His mother, however, was quite religious, and she was very, very insistent upon his participation in church activities in what I'll call a Pentecostalist church. And it shaped Danny a great deal, because throughout his life, I would say, till his death, Danny was a religious person.
For such a young child suffering from attachment disorder, school should have been a safe refuge for him. But that didn't seem to be the case.
The first day of school, his father shaved his head and made him go to school like that. And Danny was completely humiliated. The kids at school taunted him, made fun of him, called him names like Sasquatch and things like that. That was one of the things that years later Danny pointed back to as one of the worst of the mental abuses that his father did to him, was doing that to him on the first day of school.
Danny's school counselors described him as suffering from an inferiority complex with aggressive tendencies and poor impulse control.
In the 1960s, there was a lack of support structure or understanding towards mental health issues. There were clear red flags at this early stage, but they were not monitored and no intervention was provided. I find the lack of impulse control unsurprising, given his abusive home life. He's learning that regardless of what he does, he gets punished anyway. As with many children that are unsupported, Rowling tries to find a coping mechanism for his situation. In his case, it was music, but unfortunately, he begins to develop more unsavory habits as time goes on.
Danny's criminal activities, really started when he was a young boy, probably about 13 or 14. A friend of his was over at his house and he said, "Hey, come on, I want to go show you something." So Danny went with a friend. They went and hopped the fence and went to the next door neighbor's house, and the friend pointed into a window, and Danny looked in there, and the neighbor that was in there, she was naked, undressed. That was the first time Danny had experienced this peeping in windows. This is something that really stuck with him the rest of his life, and he continued to do this for years and years and years after that.
He loves the concept of getting into somebody else's private world. He likes invasion, and that is the sign of a budding serial killer and serial. They love invading other people's worlds.
Peeping was not the only criminal act that Rowling started to commit as a teenager. He also started committing acts of petty theft before moving on to more serious robberies.
He escalates. So he begins robbing the local candy shop. He begins robbing the local gas station. But then he begins committing armed robberies. So he's committing robberies on one hand, but he's also sniffing around the neighbor's house with the young girls, looking in windows. So now he's mixing kind of a sexual fantasy with the violence of committing a robbery. Now let's look at this with the idea that his dad's a cop. What is he doing? He's pointing a gun at authority. That's what he's doing, and he's saying, who's in control now, Dad? I am.
Stealing his father's gun, peeping in windows of neighbors' bedrooms. This is Danny's first real encounter with law enforcement.
Rowling's early descent has quickly spiraled to committing crimes, from stealing underwear through to armed robbery. He is exhibiting voyeuristic tendencies and breaking the law to disrespect his father. I know that each time he commits a crime, he will be getting a thrill, almost like an adrenaline rush, which he needs to replicate and had to escalate his behaviors to keep doing so. He clearly feels a need to exert power and dominance over other people, much like his father did in his work life as a law enforcement officer and with the merciless abuse he served at home. His trajectory takes a more disturbing turn as his level of violence increases. At this point, Rowling is showing all the classic red flags of antisocial personality. He has engaged in voyeurism, then petty theft, which has escalated to armed robbery. Despite being arrested, nothing has deterred Rowling from his evil descent. At 16, Danny's relationship with his overbearing father completely breaks down, and he drops out of school to find a job that will take him away once and for all. Unfortunately, in this case, Rowling chose the wrong path.
When he left school, he started to work, but he didn't think maybe he should show up on time or that he should obey with the rules of the particular place he worked at. And he became very angry, and sometimes he even threatened his bosses. So he had a very hard time keeping employment, which is not an uncommon thing for many serial killers.
So Danny served in the Air Force. He enlisted to escape from his father, largely. And while he was in the Air Force, he actually did a lot of drugs, it turns out. He claimed that he did over 100 acid trips while he was in the Air Force.
They booted him out of there, giving him a general discharge, which really means we don't want to go through the process of trying to get rid of him any other way. Let's just get him out of here quick.
After his discharge, Rowling reverts to the only stable thing from his childhood, the religion that his mother had instilled in him.
And while he was there at a church, he met a woman, her name was Martha, and he said it was, love at first sight, and courted her, and they eventually ended up getting married.
I find it interesting that he spent his young life in an authoritarian environment. I believe he had a deep desire to be included in something that would be structured and provide a safe place to live. Meeting Martha could have been a turning point. Many people from troubled upbringings find stability with a suitable partner. Unfortunately, in this case, Rowling couldn't break the cycle of abuse.
He knows what his mother had gone through with his father. As a matter of fact, his mother was beaten, his mother was abused, his mother ended up having a mental breakdown, but then when he married his wife, he did the same thing to her.
It started out really good. They had a really good marriage at first, but eventually it deteriorated, and Danny would disappear at times without letting Martha know what he was doing, and it got to the point eventually where she got fed up with it because he was still doing his peeping in windows even while he was married, and he got caught doing it, and so she knew about it, and she was embarrassed.
It's 1977. Danny Rowling is 23 years old. After being with his wife for 4 years, she separates from him after he threatens to kill her.
The night after he was served with the divorce papers, he committed his first rape. And he said he did that out of revenge. There was a woman in the neighborhood that he had been peeping on, and he ended up breaking into her house and raped her. And he did it basically out of spite, out of a need for revenge.
Having escalated to rape over his rage, Rowling then de-escalates back to his former criminal habits. Unable to hold down a job, he commits robberies whilst needing to make child benefit payments.
But what happens with a guy like him? He always has to up the ante. Sooner or later, robbing a bank is not going to be enough for him. He's going to need more.
Despite committing robberies in different states in an attempt to evade capture, eventually his actions catch up with him.
You can only commit so many robberies before you get caught. And he finally gets caught. And he spends about a year in prison. What this does for him is gives him a taste of that life, of the people, right? He starts meeting different people in there, and violence. He's around violence. And violence for Danny Rowling makes him feel comfortable.
At this point, Rowling has to be regarded as an incredibly dangerous person. He is out of prison and back living an unstable life. The red flags already highlighted would be a concern, but when combined, point to his descent to becoming murderous.
November 4th, 1989 is a very, very important day in the life of Danny Rawlings and a significant moment in this case. Danny Rawlings is working at another one of his dead-end jobs at a restaurant. He's been doing this for 10 years at this point, and there's a dispute, a workplace dispute. He doesn't show up for his shift. He claims that his manager changed the shift on him, kind of to sabotage him. Manager says that ain't true, Danny, he just didn't show up. He feels like society has turned against him, and this is very common with serial killers. They have this sort of victim mentality. They kind of have to paint this picture that they've been driven to this, or that their actions that they're about to commit are somehow justified. So on his way home from being fired from his job, he notices a woman that he had seen before, Julie Grissom, who worked at a store that he frequented. And Julie's a 24-year-old, bubbly, happy, sweet person. She lives at home with her father, who's 55, and her 8-year-old nephew. And Danny, using his peeping Tom background, kind of stalks Julie, follows her home, peers in through the windows. He could see Julie hanging with her father and her nephew, and he must have just hated the sight of it because he couldn't have it. And there was nothing he could do that could get him that.
Tom Grissom, the father, was outside in the backyard, and Danny crept up and brandished a knife, a K-bar knife, and took him into the house and tied him up and subdued him. And then did the same thing to Julie Grissom, who was the college student, and then the 8-year-old boy that lived there as well. He killed them one at a time. First he killed Tom Grissom in the laundry room with a knife. Then he killed the 8-year-old boy the same way, stabbed him in the back in the living room with a knife. And then he took Julie Grissom into the bedroom and raped her before killing her with a knife as well.
He poses her body on the bed with her legs spread very, very, very wide open, almost contorted, like he had to break her legs to do it. What does this say about him? Well, this is the beginning of the posing, which becomes very important for Danny Rowling, right? He likes to pose his victims, the female victims, that is. What is he saying by this? He is saying, look at my work. I am in control, not you.
He was thrilled. He had done something that nobody thought he could do. And you thought I was nobody, but now you're gonna see I'm somebody. And certainly after the Grissom family was murdered, it was a huge news article. So he did feel like somebody. He felt important for maybe the first time in his life.
He gets such a high out of these murders and posing Julie Grissom that now he's chasing that high, kind of like a dope addict would chase a bag of dope. Danny Rowling is now addicted to that rush of killing people.
In May 1990, he decides to confront the man who he blames for many of his problems and against whom he harbors a lingering resentment. his father.
When Danny Rowling had this confrontation with his father, James Rowling, they had this argument, and James Rowling like shot a gun into the air, and Danny Rowling responded by shooting him in the head.
What saves his father's life, although his father was never normal again, but what saves his father's life is that the shells are of such low quality that actually when the cartridges, when he shoots him, that just basically goes around inside his head rather than just go through and kill him with a brain shot. It just kind of deflects. And on the basis of that, his father is disabled thereafter, but lives some period of time.
He actually claimed that he was visited by some demonic force at the time that promised him the power to be able to do this if he would vow to get this revenge. And so he swore that he would do it. And when he was in Florida, that was his motivation. He was still wanting revenge for these things, and that's what happened when he ultimately made his way to Gainesville.
I believe his choice of weaponry gives a unique insight into Rowling's mindset. Using a knife in the first 3 murders is an interesting choice of weapon. With a knife, you have to be up close and personal. This is a clear desire to establish dominance, which he wanted to hold over Julie. By using a gun, Rowling is clearly still in fear of his father and uncertain in his ability to undertake this fatal act. He obviously does not believe that he could establish a dominance to use a knife. In this relationship, he still feels inferior. Police have yet to link him to the Grissom killings, but he's now on their radar for the non-fatal shooting of his father. He is feeling the pressure, and things are closing in. He again decides to move to a different state, Florida, where his anonymity allows him to start afresh.
When he first arrived in Gainesville, he stayed at a motel there for several nights. And eventually, I guess his money ran out, and then he ended up moving out and staying in a wooded area in Gainesville there, and put up a tent and was camping out there.
Danny Rowling recounts his descent into depravity by recording his own memoirs on a tape recorder, which he directs to his family members. The woods where he is living backed onto the accommodation of his next victim.
He went to a site and he saw a young lady who he described with some detail, and she was in a t-shirt and she was cleaning her oven, and there were woods right behind where he was. He went up, he watched her a little while, and he decided this would be his first victim. As he goes up to that back of that apartment, getting ready to break in, the story he tells anyway is that a guy that apparently has been drinking comes around the corner and says, "Hey, what are you doing over there?" And Danny runs off.
August 24th, 1990. After the foiled first attempted murder, Rowling says he was called back to the woods by a spirit who told him it was the place to hunt his prey. The next abode he comes across is that of Sonia Larson and Christina Powell, both incoming freshmen at the University of Florida.
When Danny was staying in the woods in Gainesville, one night he made another tape recording, largely to his family. He addressed his different family members, including his father. And in the tape, he expressed regret for the relationship with his father and the fact that he could never seem to please his father no matter what. And he concluded the tape by telling his father that he didn't think his father ever really cared for him at all and never really even wanted to have any kind of relationship with him. And right after that, he concluded the tape with, "I've got something I gotta do." And hours later is when he committed the first murder in Gainesville.
So Sonia Larson and Christina Powell are in their dorm, and they're getting ready for the big year coming up. They're both excited. They're college students. They're just starting their lives, really. And what happens? Here comes the boogeyman. So he creeps up the stairs, and Sonia Larson is up there. He comes up on her, and he murders her. Now that commotion wakes up Christina Powell downstairs. So he rushes downstairs. Now, with the one girl dead, now he can do what he wants to Christina Powell, which is sexual gratification.
And the second victim, he tortures and sexually batters and then murders.
Now he's going to escalate his posing, if you will. So what does he do? He poses both of these girls in provocative positions. And he says a lot by doing this. He says that he's a sexual sadist, number one. Number two, he says, look, I'm the guy who is in control of it all, and I will do what I want. He also wants someone, the first responder to that scene, to walk in and be, oh my God, what has this guy done? So he kind of is being very bold in these statements. He breaks into homes, murders people in their homes, multiple people at the same time, and then he poses them.
He wants to be the boogeyman, to exert psychological control over and to traumatize not just law enforcement, but anyone who may discover his victims. The posing of the bodies is significant. I believe it was also a final show of control over his victims. He's left them in a position which he believes is shameful, a final display of how little they matter. Putting them in a sexually provocative position is also a type of modus operandi, or MO, his unique signature which will eventually enable law enforcement to link the crimes together. Although he's been in and out of prison for less significant crimes, the fact that he got away with the Grissom murders will have inflated his sense of ego. He will begin to see himself as superior to law enforcement. Unfortunately, Rowling is now settled into his pattern and strikes again the next day.
Fresh off a double murder, on the 25th of August, 1990, he's on the hunt again. And he's found a new victim, 18-year-old Christina Hoyt. Another young life, just at the beginning of it.
He had already been to her house. He went around behind what is called a duplex, a single-story duplex. And again, he's watching her.
He goes to the back door, a sliding glass door of Krista Hoyt's apartment. He breaks in.
He goes inside. He's waiting inside the house up against a little alcove, the doors to his immediate right. She comes in. He grabs her from behind.
And what does he do to her? He does to her what he did to the others, what he's comfortable doing. And that's, he rapes her, and then he brutally murders her. But he doesn't stop there.
He went even further this time. He, with Krista Hoyt's body, he mutilated her body in many ways, including eviscerating her with a knife. He cut off her nipples.
But worse than that, he cut off her head and put it on a bookshelf. And her head was actually looking back at her body.
Now, imagine being the first cop or responder or friend or mother or brother to walk into that house. And what do you see? You see a scene out of a horror film. It's surreal. It's not reality.
A lot of people believe that the reason why Danny positioned Krista Hoyt's body that way was to enact some sort of revenge on his father, because his father had been a police officer for so many years, and he knew that, most likely a police officer would be responding to that at some point, and so he wanted to really horrify the person that discovered that scene.
But what does the crime scene tell us about Danny Rowling? It tells us that he's escalating the graphic nature of his murders, that he needs more and more now to satisfy his needs.
On August 24th, Rowling murders Christina Powell and Sonia Larson. And the next day, August 25th, he strikes again, killing Krista Hoyt, while the bodies of his first two Florida victims are being discovered.
It was Christina Powell's family became concerned because they hadn't heard from her. And so his mother and father drove down from Jacksonville to check on her, and they ended up getting the help of a maintenance person there at the apartment complex to open the door and let him in, and that's how they ended up discovering the bodies.
And that, I believe, is exactly what Danny Rowling wanted to happen. He was like creating a masterpiece in this particular case. He wanted everyone to be shocked, especially law enforcement, when they walked in, to be shocked by what they saw. In his own mind, he was thrilled about what they would see. He was thrilled that the parents would think about what happened to their daughter.
What's amazing about this is that it all happened so fast. So I don't think people really knew what hit him until it became a seismic event.
After the discovery of Sonia and Christina's bodies, police were on high alert. And then, just 8 hours later, they found Krista Hoyt's body. The media were notified and a frenzy occurred. Rowling will be aware of this newfound attention and will be reveling in the exposure and excitement of the widespread fear he's creating. I believe he'd be feeding off the panic, enjoying his ability to assert dominance on such a large scale.
Police were investigating every possible avenue to find the culprit in a city on edge. With fear creeping throughout the community, police rushed to find the culprit and arrested a troubled man called Ed Humphreys with very little evidence to support such an arrest.
In this case, there was a young man named Humphreys. To this day, there are people who still have some sense that Humphreys was part of this. He wasn't. He never should have been arrested the way he was. He should have never been treated the way he was. The press should have never fallen for what they fell for and did what they did. But he looked perfect. He was a person off his medications. He had had a bad accident. He had some real facial scarring. He looked like a really bad guy. Now, the fact, if you listen to him talk for a little while, you realize he was out of control. The person who committed these crimes was very much in control.
But there is no let-up. The man now known as the Gainesville Ripper is relentless, and even with Humphrey's arrest, the crimes do not stop.
So, at this time, we have fear in the community. We have the Gainesville Ripper running around town. Nobody knows who he is, and people are frightened.
So the very next night, so it's 3 nights in a row of killing, Danny Rowling went to another apartment complex. This one was occupied by Tracy Paulus and Emmanuel Taboda. They were friends from high school living in Gainesville. So Danny broke into their apartment in the middle of the night, which was his usual method of operation for these crimes. And he crept into Manny's bedroom. Manny was asleep on his back in bed, and Danny went up to him silently and then plunged the K-bar knife into his chest. Manny woke up with a start and fought back ferociously. Manny put up a real fight, but he eventually succumbed to 31 stab wounds in total. From there, Danny started walking out of the bedroom, and Tracy, she saw Danny standing there coming out of Manny's bedroom. And when she saw him, Tracy said, "You're him, aren't you?" Because she had heard of the killings going on around the area. And she asked him, she said, "You're him, aren't you?" And Danny looked at her and said, "Yes, it's me." Danny was a big guy. I think he was about 6'2", and pretty good build to him. You can picture what Tracy would have seen in that hallway in the dark, with this large looming figure in the dark with a ski mask on, and brandishing this big, shiny K-bar knife. It would have been a very horrific sight.
She then runs, does what anyone would do in the middle of the night. She runs and she decides to hide in her room. She locks the door, and all of a sudden this guy bursts through. He just is able to break through the door. And he does what he does to all of his victims.
Now, when we look at Tracy and we look at all his female victims, we see a common denominator. They're all petite, young, college-age girls with black hair. Lots of serial killers have a specific victim pool, and that's Danny Rowling's target victim, the young, petite woman. The other people he kills are literally collateral damage, people he did not expect when he broke into the apartment. Because if he stalked them, he'd know that other people stood in his way. He was just brazen enough to break in and commit these crimes because that thirst to kill took over for him.
police in Gainesville are left reeling with 5 horrific murders in just 3 days. The town is in complete shock, and a sense of fear runs throughout.
People were scared to death. You couldn't buy a gun at a gun shop around here. There were rumors that it was a cop. There were rumors that it was a fireman. It was somebody who had to get into the house. And basically, this was the most horrific way to start a year.
This is the start of a serial killer's rampage that he would not be able to stop. The speed of the killings, every day for 3 days, shows his goal orientation is in overdrive. The police were frantic, knowing they had to find him before there were further victims.
Danny Rowling has yet to be linked to any of these horrendous crimes.
Danny Rowling is a dangerous accumulation of all the classic red flags. Police are combing the area for any potential evidence when they came across Rowling's campsite hidden in the woods with his secret recorded memoirs and other incriminating materials.
The cops are looking for a serial killer. They have found his tent. They found his recordings. They found the gun. They found the ski mask. They've found all kinds of things.
This is where we see how disorganized he is, right? He commits a robbery. He robs a local supermarket. And then he ultimately crashes the car that he's driving away from the scene.
Police arrive at the scene of the crash and arrest Rowling, unaware he is the Gainesville Ripper. Meanwhile, the detectives still trying to solve the 5 campus murders now learn something which crucially links the 2 investigations together.
Somebody sees that Danny Rowling has been arrested for the armed robberies. This person back in Louisiana calls Crime Stoppers and says, I think he might have committed the murders here in Louisiana. And I know that you have somebody called the Gainesville Ripper in Florida, and those murders there are very similar to what happened in Louisiana. So actually, law enforcement uses the information from Crime Stoppers and they start looking at them.
Detectives from Gainesville then went to Louisiana to go over the case there and learn about it. And yeah, they decided, yes, this is extremely similar in a lot of ways. And so based on that, they made Danny one of their top suspects. While Danny was being held in jail for the robbery charges, he had some dental work done, including, I think, a tooth being removed. And so when that tooth is extracted, authorities then got that DNA and they compared it to DNA from the crime scenes, and it matched.
Despite the fact that his DNA has been found at all crime scenes and that the police have recovered the murder weapons at his campsite, Danny Rowling insists he is innocent and forces all sides to prepare for what could be a long and drawn-out trial.
So everyone was expecting Danny's trial to take a long time and really be a really traumatic event for everybody involved, but Danny surprised everybody on the first day of trial. He went up before the judge and announced that he was going to plead guilty to all the murder charges.
Here's a guy who, he committed all these brutal murders. He posed all these bodies. He admits to it, and now he wants the credit. He wants to be that nicknamed serial killer, the Gainesville Ripper.
After confessing to and being convicted of the murders, the next stage for Rowling was the sentencing trial. Would he get the death penalty?
During his trial, he claimed he felt remorse. He said, I'm sorry for what I've done, but nobody believed him because he was just trying to get out of the death penalty. He had empathy for himself. He just didn't have empathy for anybody else.
The jury decides he will get the death penalty for his crimes, and he is put to death on October 25, 2006.
I remember getting a call when he was executed from somebody in the press saying, how does it feel to put somebody to death? And I said, wait a minute. I played my role. I did what I'm supposed to do. The man who's responsible for the death of Danny Rowling was Danny Rowling.
With the accumulation of so many red flags, why were they not given the importance they should have had?
One of the problems we have with law enforcement is that when it comes down to peeping Toms, they often laugh that off. They say, oh, just a dude looking in a window, hey, not a big deal. But it is a big deal because it is a precursor to serial rape and serial homicide. It is the beginning of getting into somebody else's territory, beginning into invading their privacy, and having zero respect for the person you're doing it to. It is our hope that now that we know so much about serial killers and how they become serial killers, how they become psychopaths, how it starts so early in their life, how we can see antisocial personality disorders even when children are in elementary school, we would think that would help us out, that teachers would come forward, parents would come forward, social services would come forward, and we would be able to identify these children and take them off that path. But in fact, we're no better off than we were many, many years ago.
I believe that his father's position within law enforcement conferred a degree of respectability, which would have allowed the persistent abuse within the family home to go unchallenged. Due to the stigma around mental health at the time, even though Rowling's problems were highlighted by school counselors, there was no meaningful support or intervention. Due to the number of early crimes ranging from voyeurism to burglary, it seems strange that more significance wasn't attached to these.
So at his execution, Danny was asked if he had any final words, and he said yes, he did, but his words actually ended up being a song. He sang a hymn that was actually a hymn that had been sung at his baptism long time ago.
Well, he can argue all day that he had this horrible upbringing, but ultimately, he was responsible for these murders, and he knew exactly what he was doing. He can say, I descended into this darkness of evil, and that's what he liked to say. But in the end, he made the choice, and he knew exactly what he was doing.
Could Rowling have been stopped in his tracks before horrifically killing the 5 young people in Gainesville?
Danny Rowling was an evil and an insatiable killer, but there's no doubt he could have been identified earlier. The real problem with this case is that because of the speed and ferocity of his murder spree in Gainesville, police in Florida barely had time to draw a breath, as killing upon killing happened in such a short space of time. I believe we have to go back to Shreveport to identify where his descent could have been stopped. He was known to law enforcement for numerous burglaries and would fit the profile of someone who could escalate to murder. The Grissom murders were horrific, and the posing of the bodies should have alerted police to the fact that they were dealing not with an ordinary killer, but with someone far more ruthless and sadistic.
Someone asked me one time, was he insane? No, he didn't meet the definition of insane. And did he appreciate what he was doing? He not only appreciated it, he planned for it, he reveled in it. His recollections of it gave him great pleasure. But was he crazy? Yes. Was he insane? No. Crazy meaning was he somebody who I think saw the world with so much distortion that he couldn't fit into it? Absolutely. But it's not in any way to forgive this kind of horror.
If Danny Rowling was committing these horrifying crimes today, would he be apprehended sooner, with numerous lives spared?
With today's technological advances, I believe that Rowling would have been caught in Shreveport after the Grissom murders. Not only do we have a national criminal DNA database, we also have a far better system to track someone's criminal record, even when they are committing crimes in different states. The collation and analysis of these records would have shown a far more serious offender earlier into his descent. I would also hope that there would be far more support for a child displaying clear indicators of abuse. He should have been taken into care, or at the very least, put under the protection of social services.
These were kids who had tremendous futures. And this guy comes to town. He's a loser in every sense of the word. He's didn't finish school. He's been in trouble his whole life. And he takes out all the frustrations of his life on these randomly chosen but wonderful people.
Rowling had displayed all of the classic red flags of someone who was at high risk of becoming a serial killer. When he did come to the attention of law enforcement for a series of crimes, there was a real opportunity for intervention to help him turn his life around. But time and time again, Rowling made the choice to continue his murderous descent. Danny Rowling killed 8 people and would surely have gone on to kill more if his own stupidity hadn't stopped him in his tracks and brought him to the attention of law enforcement.